I just want to share some vocabulary words that we're going to be listening to. One of them is Civil War. When you hear the word Civil War, it means it could be just any country could have a civil war. And basically, it's a war inside the same country. Same people inside the same country. And they have a war happening. And we in the United States had a civil war between the North and the Southern states. An enslaved person is a person who's forced to be the property of another and is forced to obey them. Plantation is an estate on which crops, cotton, coffee, or sugar are cultivated by resident labor. So it's just a big piece of land, and there's people that work the land to cultivate it. That's what a plantation, we mostly know plantations in the South. Emancipation Proclamation is the process of being set free from legal or political or social restrictions. And then we have tattered, which is old, ripped, and worn. We have, whenever you see the word tattered, basically it's in relations to clothes. Clothes can look tattered. That means your favorite clothes might be tattered, which could have a hole, could be ripped, or worn. So much. So we have Abraham Lincoln, who was the president at the time. You're going to have a mention of him. It's important so that you could place in history where this story takes place. And then the last thing I want you to focus on is those are swallow-tailed kite birds. They have a long wingspan, and look at their gaze. It's kind of like an intense gaze that they have, and they soar really high in the sky. So I'm going to stop sharing now. These are the vocabulary words you're going to encounter in this story. I'm going to pin myself so that I could see myself, and everybody should be able to see. This is a true story, a true story. And what I want you to think about as I read this book is think of how in our school, our mission is to aim high and to persevere. How does she embody that? How does she aim high? How does she persevere? What kind of situations is she in that make you think, wait a minute, she is aiming high. She's a determined person. And also, I want you to think of all the symbolism in this story. Notice in the cover, these are the swallow-tailed kites that I just showed you in our vocabulary, and she's clutching onto something. And that's what we want to think about, all those symbols in this story. At the end, I'll show you some of the pictures. So let's get started. Whenever young Mary Walker was tired, she would shield her eyes from the sun and watch the swallow-tailed kites dip and soar above the trees. That must be what it's like to be free, she thought. But Mary didn't watch for long. Even at only 8 years old, she knew the first rule of the Union Springs, Alabama plantation she lived on. Keep working. She knew the second rule too. Slaves should not be taught to read or write or do anything that might help them learn to do so. Mary didn't stop working. She didn't learn to read either. But at the end of each long day, picking cotton, totting water to Papa and other slaves who chopped wood for the train tracks, or helping Mama clean the big house, she would lie in her little bed next to the crumbling fireplace and think about those birds. When I'm free, I'll go where I want and rest when I want, and I'll learn to read too. Now the illustrations in this book are done in collage, and if you could see, she's picking cotton and putting it in her bag. And here she is by the fireplace.
Where does it come from?
Cotton is a plant. When she was 15, it happened. Mary and her mother, brothers, and sister were free. The Emancipation Proclamation said so. What it didn't say was how a family with nothing except the tattered garments on their backs could find food, clothes, and a place to sleep. Mary's father had died and the family was on their own. Freedom Road to Freedom Road, across fields and through woods, ex-slaves surged like waves crashing hard to shore. Now that they were free, every road was Freedom Road. Many headed north and west and every which way, searching for long-lost family members or simply experiencing the wonder of being free. I want you to notice that the illustrator gives us a clue. If you notice the music here, that was very important for them. Songs were important for them. And also, I want you to notice how they're heading north and look at the figures and look at the collage that she put together. Others, like Mary, chose to stay in the South. An organization called the Freedmen's Bureau helped those who stayed to find shelter on abandoned Confederate land. Mary and her father settled in a one-room cabin, and for the next few years, she worked alongside her mama to help feed her siblings. 7 days a week, she churned butter, cleaned houses, and cared for other folks' children. The hours were long, and if Mary was thirsty or hungry or needed to use the outhouse, she had to wait until she got home. At week's end, she would offer Mama the one lonely quarter she had earned. She worked all day, and she earned a quarter, 25 cents, in one day. One day, Mary met a group of evangelists on the roadside. A woman with soft wrinkles in her kindly face placed a big, beautiful Bible in Mary's hands and told her, "Your civil rights are in these pages." Mary didn't know what civil rights were. She only knew that top to bottom, front to back, the book was filled with words. "I'm going to learn to read those words," she vowed, "but not today. Today, there's work to be done." So an evangelist is somebody that was spreading the gospel. And here is a Bible in her hand. And this is a clue. And there's the words coming out of her mouth. And tomorrow too, when Mary got married, she and her husband worked as sharecroppers. Sharecroppers usually rented someone else's house, using someone else's tools, and planting someone else's seeds to farm land they would never own. After they harvested the crops, almost all the money they earned went to pay for the housing, tool, and seed costs. Mary was 20 years old when her first son was born. She opened her Bible and marveled at the squiggles inside. There had been no time to learn to read. A friend wrote Mary's son's birthday in the Bible, August 26, 1869. Then Mary dipped the pen into an inkwell and made her mark beside it. Not a letter, not a name, just a mark. It was the best she could do. Notice? And notice the words. And there's her Bible. And if you notice also, can you see the squiggly lines? That's how they signed. People that could not read, that was their signature. One day, Mary's husband died. She married again, and a second son was born, then a third. Mary made marks for those sons too. Now she had 3 growing boys. More money, that's what we need, Mary thought. But the only other jobs available to Black women were as maids or nannies or cooks. The hours were long, with only half a day off on Saturdays, and like sharecropping, they didn't pay much. Mary sighed. Words would have to wait. For the next 4 decades, Mary sharecropped and did odd jobs to help support her family. 4 decades means 40 years. 10, 20, 30, 40. A decade is 10 years. In 1917, Mary's family moved to the little city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was the year of Chattanooga's great flood. The story was in all the newspapers, but Mary could only study the pictures to understand what had happened. So a flood is very devastating. when you have a flood and you're a farmer, that destroys your crops. You would think that water would help, but if there's too much water, what it does is it wipes away all the seeds and plants cannot grow because there's too much water. So just like a drought can hurt plants, because a drought means it doesn't rain, a flood can also devastate a harvest. By now, Mary was 68 and too old to sharecrop, but she continued to work, cooking, cleaning, and babysitting. She also fried fish, baked cakes, and sold sandwiches to raise money for her church. On Sundays, she would sit in the congregation, and as the preacher spoke, she would clutch her family Bible, the Bible she still could not read. I want you to notice that she's clutching onto her Bible. Everybody else is reading, but she's holding onto her Bible. Also, another clue that we have here is that some of the books, as you could see, have music notes. That means they probably were hymns. They were singing from books.
Does that mean that like maybe there's like a secret note song inside of the book?
No, it meant that it's music notes inside the book and they were singing hymns, gospel music.
Okay, just asking.
When Mary was well past 90, she and her husband sat in their creaky rockers while one or another of their sons read to them. After the two younger boys died, the eldest read. Then Mary's husband died. Several years later, her eldest son, that means her oldest son, died too. He was 94 years old. Mary had outlived her entire family. She was 114 years old and alone. Can't read, she said. Can't write. I don't know anything. Mary stood at the window of her retirement home and gazed down at the world below. Words were everywhere, on billboards, on buildings, on store windows and trucks. She sighed. All this time, she thought, and they still look like squiggles. Now I want you to notice also, there she is. And if you notice, her family is in blue. That's a clue that she's remembering her family. They've already passed on. And there she is clutching a book. And here she is looking out the window. And if you notice, we see some birds, some swallow-tailed kites. And also I want you to notice, this is the world she sees. Everything that she looks outside her window are billboards. That means advertisement on buildings, and she sees squiggly lines. This is what you used to look at when you saw words on the streets or in a book. That's how you looked at reading, because you couldn't read, and so everything was squiggles and lines. Mary had heard about a new reading class held in her building. She pursed her lips. No more waiting, she decided. Time to learn. Out of her apartment into an elevator and down to the lobby she went. When the elevator door sprang open, Mary saw people sitting under a sign with a picture of an open book. She could not read the words. A neighbor walked up to her. That's a reading class. Miss Mary, can I help you over? Mary shook her head. Then she gripped her cane, lifted her chin, and walked straight towards that sign. Look at Mary Walker. Now notice the bulletin board behind her and all the announcements. Do they look like letters? Do they look like words? Just think in your mind, what kind of images do you see? And what is she looking at when she sees the world around her? And there is the class. And notice also, I can't really read anything. I'm experiencing the world as she sees it. For the next year and more, Mary put everything she had into learning to read. It wasn't easy. After all, she was the oldest student in the class and probably in the entire country. Could someone her age learn to read? She didn't know, but by God, she was going to try. She studied the alphabet until her eyes watered. She memorized the sounds each letter made and practiced writing her name so many times that her fingers cramped. She learned to recognize sight words and then challenged herself to make short sentences with them. She studied and studied until books and pages and letters and words swirled in her head while she slept. Look at her practicing her name. And notice as she is dreaming, she is thinking about letters. One fine day, Mary's hard work paid off. She could read. Word of her accomplishment traveled, and people everywhere celebrated with her. Chattanooga's mayor, newspaper journalists across the country, and a man from the U.S. Department of Education said, "Miss Mary Walker, I pronounce you the nation's oldest student." And they all shared in her joy. Can you see some words now on this page? It says, "Happy birthday, Miss Walker." Mary felt complete. She still missed her sons, but whenever she was lonely, she read from her Bible or looked out her window and read the words in the street below. From then on, Chattanooga honored Mary's achievement with yearly birthday parties. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson sent well wishes on Mary's 118th birthday. And in 1969, President Richard Nixon did the same. Mary was 121 years old. And I want you to see what she sees now. This is what she saw outside of her window now. Does it look familiar? Can you now read these words? Mary received many gifts over the years: a radio, a sofa, her very first television, a new Bible, the key to the city, and perfume and champagne from the Canadian Mounties. She also received something that brought back those long days in the Alabama cotton fields, her first airplane ride. From the cockpit window, Mary gazed at the trees and rooftops below. "No different than a horse and a buggy ride," she joked, but she knew it was, as the airplane dipped and soared like the swallow-tailed kites of long ago. Mary decided that flying was a lot like reading. They both made a body feel as free as a bird. And there she is. Can you imagine her in this right here? What does it look like she's clutching onto? There she is, flying. Each year before her birthday celebration came to an end, someone would whisper, "Let's listen to Miss Mary." The shuffling and movement would fade away until not a sound was heard. Then Mary would stand on her old legs, clear her old throat, and read from her Bible or her school book in a voice that was clear and strong. When she finished, she would gently close her book and say, "You're never too old to learn." My friends, she was 116 years old when she learned to read. Mary lived through 26 presidents, and today, historical marker 2873 stands at 3031 Wilcox Boulevard in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to commemorate her amazing life. And it says that when she died at 121, she could still see and hear really well. She could still hold a pencil and write her name steadily, and she could walk with only minimal help from her trusty cane. She could also still sew beautiful bonnets and make cakes that she bragged were light as a feather. And that's her story. And as I think of her story, I think about all the ways that she persevered and she aimed high. And also I think about, just the courage, right? She had a lot of courage to think that 114, she, 114, she started learning, and she was fluent by 116 years old, and she lived to be 121. And sometimes we're learning, and sometimes we get a little bit tired of reading, or we don't want to read, or we're not motivated enough. Let me motivate you to aim high. Let me motivate you to persevere. If Miss Mary Walker was the oldest student and she could push forward, you can do the same. You can become great readers. You can push yourself. You can follow your teacher's lead, and you can do wonderful things and be ready so that you're ready for third grade for next year. And so I know that Ms. Roberson will be discussing a little bit more of this book, but there's a lot of symbolism here. A lot of symbolism, and I want you to just, take a breather and just think about all the obstacles that she faced, all the things that she faced in her life with her family. And at the end, did she accomplish what she wanted to accomplish? Okay, so if you like the book, can you give me a thumbs up?